Hi guys, so today we are going to look at just kind of the basics of creating an affirmative case. So I'm sure you're probably thinking after watching that last video, where on earth do we start to address the topics and create an affirmative or negative case? So for the affirmative case, the very first place you're going to start is the stock issues. So stock issues, think of them as kind of the main topics you have to address, and that's really kind of going to designate the order in which you write your case. So the very first thing you're going to talk about after you choose the issue you're going to focus on is the harms. So harms are the problems that the affirmative team establishes that are in the current status quo that they need to solve. So what's happening that's really bad that is needing to be prevented. We'll go more in depth on each one of these here in a minute. Then you'll move on to inherency. So you're going to have to prove that whatever the harms aren't being solved with the way things currently are, with the status quo. There's something preventing them from being solved, and you have to name that thing. Then you can move on to topicality, which basically just you're proving that your topic that you're talking about is in line with the prompt you're supposed to be talking about. Usually, you don't really address this too much in your affirmative constructive. That's something that you'd probably have to defend in your second speech or your rebuttal. So then after you say that there's something blocking you from being able to solve this problem with the way things are right now, you can extend that by saying like how significant these harms are. It's just called significance. So if you feel like you can really make a good case that these are really, really bad, and that's why we have to change it, then you can do that. Sometimes, though, the harms you're talking about aren't necessarily like extreme. They're more like just disadvantages for people. So if you're doing something in your topic that's not a very extreme harm, then you wouldn't use significance. But if it's like a terrible harm, like, hundreds of thousands of people are going to die or are dying, then you would extend to significance. And then there's solvency. So basically you have to prove your argument using a plan. And you have to say, this is the plan to change this harm. So let's go back to talking about the harms. So specifically, what you're going to have to do is that one of the very first things in your speech is you're going to say, these are the main problems with the way the world is right now in this issue. And you have to explain the harms themselves. So you don't have to have like 6 or 7 harms. You can have like 2 or 3, but they have to be presented at the beginning, and you have to be able to solve all the harms you. So if you say the harms to this are, thousands of people are dying every week, there's no economic security, and disease is spreading, then you have to be able to solve all 3 of those harms in your plan. So only say harms that you can actually solve with the plan you're going to present. And then after you say what's wrong, so if you say, hundreds of thousands of people are dying, then you have to say specifically what part of our current law structure, or in this case, policing forms, are preventing it from being solved currently. So there has to be something in your way. So usually you're either going to suggest some structural way, like a legal barrier. So some laws preventing this from getting better. You can do an attitudinal inherency. So you're saying the current attitude of the government is preventing people like this thing from being passed or changing, or existential. So the fact that the harms are not being solved, and there's no current framework at all for them to be solved. So you have to pick kind of what way you're going to go. So if you have very kind of like lower harms, like it's not like, millions of people are dying right now, then you probably can skip significance and just go straight into your solvency. But you do need to make some small reference to the fact that your harms are great enough that it warrants us changing things right now and not, 10 years from now. So the bulk of your affirmative case is really just going to be you arguing solvency. And that's really your plan. So you're going to present a plan for how to fix the harms that you listed in the beginning. And this, again, will take most of your time in this speech because you have to say, specific examples of like how you're going to do it, if you need money, where that money is going to come from, and how it's going to get passed as a law. So let's look at what all of this looks like with an example argument. So we're going to use the 2020 CX topic, the one about substantial criminal justice reform. So I'm going to say for this example that, let's say my case is going to be about rehabilitation of drug offenders. Okay, so we're going to enact substantial reform by rehabilitating drug offenders rather than putting them in jail. So what would my harms, inherency, maybe significance, and solvency look like for this? So for my harms, I might talk about how maybe drug offenders are not receiving help for their addictions. And this is not only a detriment to them, but also to the public health, their family, and the people that are going to have to support them using their tax dollars if they keep getting put back in jail. So I would have specific evidence here. I would have articles that are going to back me up in this claim, and I would have statistics and information that would support that statement. Then I would move on to my inherency. So I would say currently, the status quo, the way things are right now, relies on us basically using this prohibitionist approach that's failing, right? Like we want to get rid of all the drugs. We're not really helping people change their frame of mind about the drugs, and that's what's the problem. So my significance statement here, I would say something like, if we don't make a change, we'll continue to lose mass amounts of tax money unnecessarily and put innocent people at risk because they are having to live with, people that are addicted to drugs without them having actually been rehabilitated. And again, after each of these main statements, I would have articles and statistics and evidence backing up my claims. So then I would move on to actually explaining my plan. So my solvency is now I'm going to tell you all this research that backs up how we could rehabilitate drug offenders rather than putting them in jail, and it would save us a bunch of money. And I'd tell you all the good things about this plan. And then that's how you write your first affirmative constructive. So it's really just a kind of a formula that you're laying out. It's almost like writing an essay, right? Like, in your introduction, you're going to do this, and then your first paragraph, you need to talk about one of your main points. And it's basically kind of like that. They just have different names, and it sounds confusing, but honestly, once you start writing it, it's really not bad. So that's the first constructive. There is one more affirmative speech, but it's much shorter, and you basically are just extending your argument. So you're not necessarily going to have to find tons of new information that you didn't have in this first speech. It's just going to be information that backs up all of your main points further. So if the negative team tries to attack them in their first speech, you have something to defend against them. Okay, well, that's the end of this video. So you know kind of the basic structure of an affirmative speech in CX, and pretty soon we're going to start researching our topics and start writing one of our own. Thanks for watching, guys.